This program was made possible in part by What is bold? At Bowie State University, we believe it means always striving for more. Bold is born at BSU with a mission to empower students to break barriers and change the world. Bold is preparing students for careers in STEM fields like cybersecurity and nursing. Bold is training the next generation of entrepreneurs to shape the global marketplace. Bowie State University, taking tomorrow boldly.
Welcome to Conversations for Change, our national conversation awakening, HBCU reckoning and revival about the history, culture, and significance of historically Black colleges and universities. I'm Dr. Kay Wise Whitehead, the host of Today with Dr. K on Morgan State University's WEAA 88.9 FM and a proud graduate of an HBCU, Lincoln University in Pennsylvania.
And I'm Jared Carter Sr., founding editor of the HBCU Digest and a graduate of another HBCU, Morgan State University. Tonight, we're looking at HBCUs through the eyes of the people who power them, and we'll be joined by students, alumni, and leaders from around the country who will discuss what HBCUs mean to them, our community, and our nation.
Most historically Black colleges and universities were established after 1865. Today, there are 101 HBCUs. HBCUs comprise 9% of four-year institutions.
That's right, and HBCUs enroll 24% of all Black undergraduates pursuing bachelor's degrees. HBCUs graduate 46% of Black women who earned degrees in STEM disciplines between 1995 and 2004. 15 HBCU engineering schools confer most engineering degrees awarded annually to African American students. And as America continues to grapple with issues of race, diversity, equity, and inclusion, HBCUs across the country, founded primarily in the mid-Atlantic and southern states in the mid-1800s, are experiencing a renewed surge of interest and support from the media and philanthropic community.
However, the story of HBCUs is really one of resilience. Despite experiencing systemic underfunding and oppositions, HBCUs have always found a way to both stand in the midst of the moment and rise to meet the moment. And they have produced graduates who have changed and are changing and will change the landscape of America. Tonight, in addition to our conversation, we're going to take a look at clips from the Emmy Award-winning documentary, Shaw Rising, about the oldest HBCU in the South and its impact on the nation.
Ella Baker is important to Shaw because she initiated change. She had the courage to lead, to sacrifice, and to make the example of what may be needed in order to move ahead.
Ella Baker is the kind of student that historically Black colleges and universities produced and boast of. When Ella Baker graduates as valedictorian of her class in 1927, the administration is probably happy to see her go. She's shaken a lot of leaves here and ruffled a lot of feathers, in part because of her commitment to social justice.
As a girl, Ella Baker listened to her grandmother's stories about life as a slave in Warren County, North Carolina. And she witnessed firsthand the early struggle for Black civil rights.
The family story had it that during election time, if white people tried to intimidate Black voters, Ella Baker's grandfather was one of the men who would go and offer them protection. So she comes from a family that's proud, that's independent, who pass on this idea that you must improve yourself, and then help to improve the community of which you are a part.
After graduating from Shaw, Baker worked as a journalist in Harlem before being hired by the NAACP as a field secretary, and quickly moves up the ranks to director of branches. She is an outspoken advocate for equality and pushes for more support of local activist campaigns.
She challenges the kind of autocratic leadership that is part and parcel of the NAACP, its kind of patient preaching and practices. She really wants to see a diversity of its membership. She wants it to move out of its middle class box and to embrace the working class and kind of bring them into the fold.
On December 1st, 1955, the modern civil rights movement begins, when Rosa Parks refuses to surrender her seat to a white man on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Her arrest sparks a 13-month mass protest that ends with the Supreme Court ruling that segregation on public buses is unconstitutional. Following the success of the bus boycott, church ministers from across the South formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to coordinate local protest groups and nonviolent resistance. Led by Martin Luther King, the SCLC becomes a new base for political social action and drafts Ella Baker to organize its efforts. But Baker favors a broad, grassroots approach over King's top-down, charismatic leadership.
I think my favorite quote by Ella Baker is, "Strong people don't need strong leaders. They need training in how to become leaders themselves." On February 1st, 1960, the sit-ins begin in Greensboro, North Carolina. And Ella Baker recognizes that this is a new phase of activism.
Within weeks, students at other HBCUs across the South mount similar protests.
The beginning of 1960 was a breath of fresh air for her. It was the very thing that she'd been looking for, the opportunity that she'd been waiting on, and she was able to convince the SCLC to convene a meeting of those student activists at her alma mater. Undoubtedly, in the back of her mind, when she returned home to Shaw, it must have been a kind of, "I told you so."
I was literally a son of Ella Baker. I met her in 1960 when SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was established on this campus. She was a wise lady.
Now, the NAACP and the SCLC had an ulterior motive in mind. They had intended to bring these students into their folds, and they, in fact, were competing to see who among them could get as many students as quickly as possible. And it was, in fact, Ella Baker that said, "Oh, no, we want them to remain independent."
Dr. Martin Luther King wanted the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to be under the parentage of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. She said, "No way. Old folks haven't made any changes, so don't stop young folks from making changes." So SNCC remained independent throughout those years. I had heard all of my life, prepare for the opportunities that are coming. That was one of the opportunities that came. We went monthly down to Atlanta, Georgia, to Morehouse College to sit with Dr. King and Ella Baker and other members of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference who supported us.
So you had a bunch of personalities coming together to convene to centralize a fairly decentralized movement. There was one faction who wanted to concentrate on voter registration and another who wanted to concentrate on direct action protests. And it was, in fact, Ella Baker who negotiated this kind of mutuality, that the organization could have these two foci and they didn't have to be mutually exclusive.
I was one of the major organizers of the sit-ins. The sit-ins were directed at variety stores that would allow us to shop, but we could not sit down at the lunch counters. After A&T had sat in at Woolworth's in Greensboro, we organized ourselves a couple of weeks later, and we sat in at Woolworth's in Cameron Village. I was the first to be arrested. The reason that we could be a potent weapon is that we didn't have jobs. If our parents had gotten out and demonstrated, the economic order and political order would have decimated them. When we were demonstrating, we were not allowed students who had high-profile parents, teachers, and postal workers, we would not allow them because we didn't want to take a chance that that picture would be taken and it would be in the paper and their parents would be fired. My father was a minister. They couldn't fire him.
Those young men and women who came to create the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee fanned out throughout the South, put their lives on the line, and worked arm in arm with other civil rights organizations to tear down the walls of segregation and help build the foundation for a nation that provides social justice for all, yet to be achieved but fought for by students and faculty and administrators alike.
With the coming of student activists, you see that there is a very consistent and persistent effort to dismantle segregation through direct action, nonviolent protests. And that had been unheard of until that time. And that is in part why student activists from Black colleges were so unique and Black colleges were so special, because they were arguably at the nexus of this modern civil rights movement in a way in which even the Black church was not.
The impact of that is, had there not been the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, there would not have been the Civil Rights Act of 1964 signed by President Lyndon Johnson. No SNCC, no Civil Rights Act, no Voting Rights Act, no Obama. It's just as clear as anything. So what we did as young college students was revolutionary in changing the condition of things in this nation.
Tonight is about conversation, so throughout the show, we want to hear from you. Place your comments and questions in the chat on Facebook, YouTube, or our OV platform, and we'll share your thoughts. Let's check out WHUR-FM 96.3 host Autumn Joy, who recently talked with her listeners about their HBCU experience.
Y'all know I'm an HBCU grad. Yep, I went to University of Maryland, Eastern Shore. I'm asking my Live Squad to call in if you graduated from an HBCU, or even if you're currently in school, holla at me. Let me know why it was so important for you to go to an HBCU. Rodney, which HBCU did you go to?
Morgan State University.
All right, MSU. So really quickly, talk about the importance of attending an HBCU.
You know, getting an education, you can get it, anywhere, but it's the life experiences that you also gain when you go into an HBCU that I think is very important.
We know of the historic role HBCUs and their graduates have played in social justice. But what are some of the examples of HBCU communities advancing issues like voting rights, healthcare access, police reform, secondary education improvement, and more today?
What I think about, Jared, in terms of listening to that Shaw clip, is that notion of without SNCC, you wouldn't have a Civil Rights Act,
right,
a Voting Rights Act, you wouldn't have the work toward getting Obama into office. I'd back up and say without Shaw, without HBCUs, you wouldn't have SNCC.
Absolutely.
And I think that's part of our question tonight. And joining us to help answer this question is Dr. Wes Bellamy, political chair. He's department chair of political science at Virginia State University. Dr. Kenesha Nicole Grant, Associate Professor of Political Science at Howard University, and Dr. Kalia Harris, the Vice President of K-12 Education Policy at the Center for American Progress. Dr. Bellamy, let's start with you. So you were actively involved in advocating for the removal of the Robert E. Lee statue in Virginia. It was removed today. Can you talk about what this means for HBCU communities that have fought so hard against systems and symbols of oppression?
Sure. First, thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor to join illustrious guests and panelists like yourselves. In Charlottesville, Virginia, where I live, we actually removed our Confederate statues of both Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson about a month or so ago. And in Richmond, Virginia, the largest statue, the one in our state's capital on Monument Avenue, was removed today, much of which started here in Charlottesville in the work in which, while I was on city council in 2016, led by activists here in the community and myself serving as the lone African American at the time and the vice mayor at the time. But I think it's important for us to notate that one, HBCU students, leaders, we've always been at the forefront of fighting and advocating for our people. That will never change. But what I'm very elated to see now is that we're pushing more towards a policy perspective. You see individuals from HBCUs using their collective power and influence across the spectrum, and universities collaborating with each other to push policy and be able to hold elected officials on the local, state, and federal level accountable for what they say they're going to do and ensure that they do it. And if they don't do it, then we rally and band together to hold them accountable with our voice and with our vote.
Dr. Bellamy, let's stick on that issue. You are actually part of an initiative at Virginia State that is actually embedded in the training of political activists and elected officials. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. I'm excited to announce that we are officially kicking off the John Mercer Langston Institute for African American Political Leadership this weekend. So on Friday and Saturday, we'll have our initial cohort of 17 individuals from across the Commonwealth of Virginia. These are persons who are some in undergrad, some who are former elected officials, some who are looking to make the next jump, mid-level executives and so forth. And what we're doing is developing a pipeline of the next level of leaders, whether that's those who are looking to be elected, whether that's those who are looking to work specifically on policy initiatives behind the scenes, those who are looking to be city managers, those who are looking to work at the State House and so forth. It's just a wide gamut of individuals from the activist and organizer side as well, who are all coming together. And we're talking specifically about how we use our talents to implement change. It's the first of its kind here in Virginia, a political institute focused specifically on Black folk and Black issues. And we're really proud to have it in what I believe to be the home of Black political activism, Petersburg, Virginia, at the Virginia State University.
Dr. Grant, this feeds right into your expertise on the impact of the Great Black Migration in the United States and the shift of political power. This is something you've written about in your book. Can you talk a little bit more about that, about how that movement achieved greater political mobilization and activity across the United States?
Yeah, there's a very interesting relationship between historically Black colleges and Black people who go on to get elected to political office in general, and in particular in the story that I tell in the book about those who get elected to political office in the North. And so when you look at the individuals who went on to get elected to, who first moved during the Great Migration, where more than 6 million Black people leave the South, going to various places across the United States, when you look at the individuals who went on to get elected to office, we find that many of them are historically Black college graduates. And so we know that something special happens at the HBCU campus, such that individuals who are new to these communities in the North decide not only to run for office, but are successful in organizing their communities to get elected.
Dr. Harris, I just want to follow up with you. This whole idea of a blue Georgia and quite potentially a blue North Carolina. But in the back of my mind, Dr. Harris, I think about a red Texas. I think about a red Tennessee. I think about some of the dangers that Black folks are dealing with in the South. Can you talk a bit about how HBCUs throughout the South can help add protection that's needed for Black folks in these places that are still very red?
Absolutely. You know, as a proud alumna of the Morgan State University, I am clear how important it is for HBCUs to really be protective and to provide supports both on the political front, but also in everyday living and engaging the public as it relates to their rights, as it relates to how they can be engaged in civic society. And, you know, we have HBCUs across the South, but unbeknownst to some of the folk in Baltimore, Maryland is south of the Mason-Dixon line. And, you know, we have issues that range from being in a blue state with a red governor, as I am in Maryland, to being in a very red state like Texas, but you see those glimmers of light in highly populated communities by Black folk like Dallas, like Houston, and you understand that the role of HBCUs in making sure those centers of Black excellence are anchored, that they are supported, that our community members have access to opportunities that have been long held from them. We see a resurgence of the celebration of Juneteenth and Freedom Day, the emancipation of enslaved people in this country. And we see the connections being made by HBCUs to capitalize on that. Furthermore, we see our children returning to HBCUs. Many people kind of adopted a grass is greener on the other side, or the white man's water is wetter, and felt like achievement at the collegiate level was sending their children to institutions that were not only not made for them, but also actively hostile to their existence. And we see, just like at Morgan State University, it has the largest freshman class it has ever had in its history. We see that happening across the South. So to capitalize on that and make sure that those students are being fortified and supported, that they're having access to careers across the spectrum of the future of work is going to be critical. And just like Dr. Grant said, when we think about politics and the number of folk who go from HBCUs into politics, people who may come from around the country and move to states like Texas and Mississippi, Georgia, Tennessee, and decide to build a family there, but also get civically engaged and get involved in politics so that those enclaves of blue spread throughout the state.
So folks, this is an interactive show, so we want to hear from you. Put your questions in the chat and we will answer them live. We already have somebody chiming in, and the first question is for Dr. Bellamy. A student would like to know, how do you get started as an activist and balance that with your schoolwork, which I would add, which is what they're there to do, which is to succeed in class. How do you balance the two, Dr. Bellamy?
Well, I think what we talk a great deal about with our scholars at Virginia State University is that you're a scholar first. You're a student and you're a scholar first. And activism is a marathon. Everybody likes to quote Nipsey Hussle, the marathon continues, but you're truly running a marathon. So you got to run the first leg of the race, and that's the educating yourself on the issues. And hopefully that's what you're at the institution to do. Furthermore, as we move into activism, I think that you have to find out where you are best suited at your current moment in time. I think I was just having this conversation with a student yesterday where she said, well, I see some folks on social media and they're doing all these great things and they're leading marches and they're speaking at this and they're my age, and I'm just feeling like I'm not doing enough. And I think that I would tell our young folk that, one, everything that we see on Instagram and everything we see on TikTok is not real life. A lot of it is cap. And secondly, that we have to do what God called us to do as individuals. Not everybody is meant to lead a 5,000 person march. Not everybody is meant to speak at the March on Washington. But I can say for a fact, I know that the statues would not have come down in Charlottesville without individuals on the back of the house or on the back end who people will never hear from, who did the policy and research work in order to allow me and others to be able to do this work. So we all have a role to play. God has put a calling on all of our lives. So do your part. And when it's your time, it'll be your time. But for now, focus on school and do what you're supposed to do.
Dr. Grant, we got another question. You went to FAMU, Protest U, some of us like to call it. Do you think that HBCU students today share the same understanding of their responsibility to change community like the HBCU students of the past?
FAMU was definitely Protest U. I think I was protesting with FAMU people while I was in 12th grade, like coming from South Florida to protest with FAMU students in Tallahassee. So yeah. That's certainly something that was part of our life then. I think it's something that's still part of historically Black college student life. When I started at Howard, which is now some time ago, the students there went viral for their online protest of the death of Mike Brown. Howard University students currently spend time in various communities in Washington, D.C. doing activist work. They currently spend time going to the White House, maybe a little bit less now that VP Harris is there than they did during the previous administration, but they are still thinking about those things and working on those things. And one of the things we have to remember is that the historically Black college is full of historically Black college graduates as members of their faculty. And so while I'm teaching my students about whatever we're talking about in state and local government, there's a little aside that is about Black politics as it exists not just in who represents us in these state and local seats, but also what are the issues that matter to Black people and what should they do in their home states and communities to move the needle for Black people who live there. So absolutely, I think it is the case that they are still as active as we were. Although, again, I think the FAMU bunch is a special bunch. Being that we're down the street from the Capitol, it doesn't take much to get us riled up to go over there.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bellamy. Thank you, Dr. Grant, and thank you, Dr. Harris, for just laying the groundwork and giving our students an insight into what it looks like when academics meets activism when it actually happens on the streets. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Let's take a moment and check back in with Autumn to see what her listeners have to say.
Talk about the importance of attending an HBCU and why you decided to do it.
When I came to Howard University, I did not even realize the importance of an HBCU, coming from a little small town in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But once coming, I just knew the importance of, being in a community with, people that look like me, professors that look like me, and teaching me about Black history, teaching me about culture, and just really just embodying like a full Black African-American experience, things that I just never knew growing up.
Many HBCU graduates credit the nurturing environment of HBCUs for helping them realize their potential as leaders.
So how do HBCUs affirm students in their identity? And why is developing leaders so important in this age of racial reckoning? Let's take another look at the Emmy Award-winning film, Shaw Rising.
I was hoping that having elected the first Black president of this country, the issue of race would have been subsided, but it's not.
I think we are striving to live in a world that's non-racial by removing a lot of what we have inherited and what we've been taught and what we've been willing to accommodate.
For African Americans, there are still huge gaps of educational attainment, huge gaps of employment attainment, huge gaps of wealth attainment. And so the notion that we're in a post-racial society, that we've achieved all of the goals of this great democracy, I think you'd find most African Americans hard-pressed to embrace that notion.
I believe that racism exists because we turn to fear more than we do love. We fear what we don't understand. We fear what we don't recognize. We fear what we feel will take something from us. And if you really sit and think about it, none of that is real. No one is trying to take anything from anyone. No one is trying to overthrow anyone's power or infringe on anyone else's rights. Everyone, I think, wants the same thing. We all want opportunity. We all want to be happy. We all want to achieve. We want that for our children. We want that for our communities. And to actively deprive one group of that for one reason or another, I think it really boils down to fear.
I think so often we become complacent with things as they are, rather than how things ought to be. So we need more soldiers of truth who are willing to step forward and follow that inner voice that lets you know what's right and what's wrong.
So how have HBCU communities seized the moment to research and develop legislation supporting Black colleges? And what are some examples at the state level?
MPT senior correspondent Charles Robinson files this report on legislative efforts at the state and federal levels.
We finally got to this day. on behalf of a sister and a mother of 2 HBCU graduates. And so, not to hold that up, let's get signed.
The final settlement provides $577 million to 4 historically black colleges and universities in Maryland. It's spread out over 10 years.
This roadmap and how Maryland has actually set a path forward in a very positive way. Other states will probably definitely be looking at this, and that where we have HBCUs.
Not the first time that we've seen kind of states settle these disputes over decades of underfunding for HBCUs. We've seen it in Mississippi, we've seen it in Alabama, we've seen it, across the country.
Litigation tends to be that tool of last resort when things just move the way that they should.
For those not in Maryland, Christmas came early with a multi-million-dollar grant to 23 HBCUs.
These dollars are unrestricted, which Mackenzie Scott team was saying that we trust and value and respect the leadership at our institutions that will make the best decision as it relates to how to use those funds. Unheard of.
The Scott Grant put in motion a number of gifts from corporations like Facebook and Google. Many people ask, what's the return on investment? Well, many HBCUs are seeing it in increased enrollments.
More students accepted our offer to come to Morgan this year than ever. And so we have over a 100% increase in the number of new students at Morgan this year over 2019.
At the federal level, the bipartisan Ignite HBCU Excellence Act would provide additional funding to renovate, modernize, or construct new campus facilities and includes technological upgrades. I'm Charles Robinson.
Okay, so joining us to discuss this important issue are Representative Harold Love Jr., representing the 58th District in the Tennessee Legislature, Senator Charles Sydnor III, representing the 44th District in the Maryland General Assembly, and Oyin Adedoyin, a reporter for the Chronicle of Higher Education and a 2021 graduate of Morgan State University. Welcome to the show, one and all. Senator Sydnor, we will begin with you. You were the lead lawmaker on legislation that led to that landmark federal lawsuit settlement for the $577 million granted to Maryland's 4 HBCUs. Can you talk to us about the process of galvanizing support for that kind of policymaking, and how did you get communities behind and aware of your efforts?
Yes, and good evening, and thank you for having me this evening. I came into the legislature back in 2015, and as a member of the Legislative Black Caucus, this was one of our priorities going into the 2017 administration. The chair at the time asked if I would not mind leading or co-leading some efforts that the Black Caucus wanted to make in terms of attempting to settle this lawsuit. I will tell you that I did not do too well on the first shot, but there were lessons learned. We didn't do a good job of galvanizing and having the type of support from HBCU alumni and students and the like. Lesson learned, we went into later sessions. There was some leadership change in both the House as well as the Senate. And there was some renewed efforts. Everyone within the Black Caucus was 100% behind what we were attempting to do. We worked on and had a rally put together where we had speakers from our HBCUs, all 4 of them, come. I would say you probably had well over between 100 and 200 people at that rally. We had our historically, or I should say our Divine Nine organizations involved in galvanizing their membership to come out. And we had people testifying, sending letters, expressing the desire to settle the lawsuit. We passed that bill in the 2020 session. Unfortunately, Governor Hogan vetoed that legislation. So it was a priority going into the 2021 session. Rather than trying to overturn or override his veto, we put in a similar bill, and ultimately he ended up signing that legislation. And our Attorney General did his negotiations with the plaintiffs, and I believe it was at the end of May that settlement agreement was signed, and it was done.
Now that the lawsuit has been settled, now that the money is going to come down the pipeline over the next 10 years, how are you doing the work to keep people motivated in terms of focusing on HBCUs and trying to lift them all up to where they need to be?
The people who have been motivated, those alumni who've been working along with me, they're still motivated. They know that the legislation calls for funding to go to these schools over the next 10 years. So I can promise you, I get calls from alumni from the schools every couple months, just talking and giving me information that I may want to be aware of in order just to monitor and see how things are going. So I don't think people won't be motivated. The alumni were extremely motivated in getting this lawsuit settled, and they're extremely motivated in making certain that the funding that the state put forth is used in the way that they think it should be over the next 10 years.
Let's go to you in Tennessee. So Maryland finishes up their settlement and litigation early in the summer. It is right around that time that you started spearheading efforts to analyze and report on funding inequities to Tennessee State University in the form of land grant funding and federal matching from the state of those federal funds. Can you talk a little bit about that program, some of your discovery, and what lies ahead for that effort to reclaim some $500 million in funding owed to Tennessee State?
Sure, absolutely. Our journey to this $544 million really started when I got elected in 2012. Had a conversation with Dr. Glover, who was the new president of Tennessee State, about what issues were most important to her. And she expressed the fact that they had not received their state match for their land grant money. So we worked over the next couple of years to get the state match for the land grant money. And in 2015, we were able to get the match finally made. But then I began to ask the question, if Tennessee State had not had the match in the years that I was in office, how much money were they kept from getting in prior years? So initial research showed us the first 20 years, and then had other conversations. And then we had a committee formed by the speakers of the House and Senate that was really going to research how much money was missing from Tennessee State's coffers from the state from 1955 to 2020, because we know that there was a disparity between what the 1862 land grant and the 1890 land grant Tennessee State were getting. Committee began to research, looked in the budget books, discovered that from 1955 to 2007, there were no entries for Tennessee State University to receive land grant dollars. And so this led us to understand that there was a huge funding disparity. And that amount, to your point, ended up being $544 million in those state matching funds. And the biggest issue is this: when those state matching dollars are not given to the university has to then put those matching dollars up in order to keep those federal funds that they've drawn down still in the school.
So, Oyen, I want to come with you. With your work at the Chronicle of Higher Education, you have kind of a long eye on what is happening. You can step back a bit from being right on the ground with the legislation. Can you talk with us about how HBCUs, with this recent bump in funding, how are they doing across the board?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. And it's interesting to see what not just the state funding, because what we've seen over the period of recent years is that this historic underfunding of HBCUs happens all over the country. And so it's interesting to see donations from philanthropists like Mackenzie Scott, for example, who donated to dozens of HBCUs. And an interesting study actually came out of Rutgers University that analyzed what were the differences in some of the HBCUs that she donated to compared to those that didn't receive donations. And it's a known fact that most HBCUs have a majority of Pell eligible students, students who require certain funding in order to even attend college. And so it was interesting to see how certain universities were leveraging the funds that were given to them from Mackenzie Scott in order to encourage state funding. And so in Morgan State, the university president, David Wilson, actually used around $500,000 of the money from the Mackenzie Scott donation to kind of come to the state and say, listen, we can put this up if you give us a $3 million appropriation towards staffing and research at Morgan State's new Center for Urban Health Equity. And so he was able to kind of leverage a bit of this funding that was gifted and use it to then match up to the state and say, now we need these funds to be rolling in year-round, yearly.
Thank you so much, Oyen. We will continue to watch what's happening with the funding for HBCUs. Thank you so much, Representative Harold Love Jr., representing the 58th District in Tennessee, Senator Charles Sydnor III, representing the 44th District in Maryland's General Assembly, and Oyen, thank you so much from the Chronicle of Higher Education and 2021 graduate of Morgan State University. Now let's take a moment to check back in with Autumn.
Line right now, I've got Senior Vice President and Chief Content Officer of Maryland Public Television, Mr. Travis Mitchell. Hi, Travis.
Hey, Autumn, how are you?
I am good. So HBCU week, wow, are you excited?
I'm very excited. I couldn't be more proud. I'm super excited.
Yeah, so talk about why HBCU week is so important.
Well, Autumn, I know you probably have been talking today, I'm sure, with your audience, and you are a proud graduate of University of Maryland Eastern Shore.
Yes.
Quite simply, for many of us who have graduated from HBCUs, the way I put it is this. I grew up on the campus of Shaw University. My parents went to Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was exposed to what I believe was my Wakanda before I knew what Wakanda was. It was a place where I was affirmed. It was a place where I believed I could be anything that I dreamed of, and the entire environment nurtured me as a leader and prepared me to be my best. And so I believe that had it not been for Shaw, no Shaw University, I would have never gone to Morgan State University. So no Shaw, no Morgan, no me.
Let's take another look at the Emmy Award-winning film, Shaw Rising.
It's graduation day at Shaw University. 150 years after it was founded to teach freed slaves to read and write. The seeds sown here by Henry Martin Tupper are still bearing fruit. But given the broad range of options in higher education today, some question the ongoing need for historically black colleges and universities.
We need HBCUs because there are still underrepresented people who need education. They may not have had the money, they may not have had the grades, they may not have had the family support. But Shaw provides, and other HBCUs provide that opportunity, that leg up to level the playing field and maintain opportunity for all.
If there is an antidote to racism in this nation, it is education. And that is why it is so important that we invest in it and we invest in institutions that have proven track records in serving the best interests of their students and of their communities despite whatever difficulties they face. If you even for a moment just removed blackness from these institutions, I don't think that anyone would argue about their validity. What we're basically arguing about is should race matter. And fortunately or unfortunately, it still does. The way in which it matters here matters best and matters most, I'd like to believe, in order for America to live up to its creed and to be the nation that it has aspired to be.
In my mind, are HBCUs relevant? I think, yeah. You know, any institution that can provide an education to somebody is definitely going to be relevant. And to say that that HBCUs aren't relevant is very offensive to some people.
What mattered at the origination of HBCUs, why HBCUs were created in the first place. We needed opportunities for education. We needed advocacy. We needed a support system. We needed a safe haven. And those things that were needed then are still needed now.
We need them because of the outstanding service that they have rendered to a significant population that has been ignored. And until racism is removed in our society, there will still be a need to have institutions that push for justice and equality.
Joining us to talk about their role as soldiers of truth on their campuses and in their communities are Jatia Stewart, Student Government President at Bowie State University, Alana Thomas, Vice President of Howard University Student Association, Ayotomiwa Tommy Fashola, SGA President at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. Good evening to all of you.
So,
Good evening. Thank you guys for having us.
We're so happy that you joined us. We want to hear from the students about your experience at HBCUs. Now, Ms. Thomas, I'll start with you. Howard is unique because for generations, students have fought for national, campus, and local issues. Can you talk about what it's like to be a part of a campus that supports and encourages activism?
Yes, so coming from the state of Florida where activism is very dim, I must say, unfortunately. Coming to Howard University, being in the center of DC, basically being in the center of everything. We're just the epicenter of creating movements and uprising and uplifting students to fight for what's right and what, we deserve in this nation.
Let me follow up on that since you're at Howard. Is there a tipping point for you and for the student body? Because we know Howard is really famous or infamous for pushing back on administration as well. Are there ways where you look at activism on campus and say, here's where we need to push, or here's where we need to collaborate with our institution?
Yes, so that is why the way our student government structure is set up is into 3 different branches. And so me being a part of the executive branch with my president, we are the bridge between administration and students. And, we have to draw that line in which when speaking with administration, we simply say, this is not right. What you are doing, the policies you are implementing, or the changes that you are making without the voices of the students is just wrong. And if we have to step up and speak up and push back, then we will do so. It's not the first time Howard has done it, and it's not the last time Howard students will do it.
And then we'll go to you, Ms. Stewart. At Bowie State University, we just came out of a segment talking about the student activism in the Maryland lawsuit. What are some of the issues that Bowie students feel are important, not just on campus, but in the community as well? And how is the SGA supporting the efforts of those students?
Hi, so being the SGA president at the oldest HBCU in Maryland, of course, there's like a lot of challenges that we face here on campus, but one main thing would be having a voice, just being young Black people, period. Like, we always want to have a voice. So that's why also like my SGA, we're a part 3 different branches, and we add different positions to the board that we see will help people get their voices out. And we have this position that's the Political Actions and Community Outreach Chair. So that position allows students to have this one person dedicated to marches, having people express their feelings, like just advocating everything for all of the students on our campus.
Ms. Stewart, I want to follow up on that. When you talk about advocating for all the students on your campus, when you look at change at Bowie State University, what does that look like for you from your perspective?
So change for me, in my perspective, it would just be, it's a lot, honestly. From my perspective, I will say, because it's like so much they could, there's always room for improvement. But in my perspective would be just the students like feeling like, yeah, the administrators are going to be here for me. They're going to listen to me. I won't have to I wouldn't have to rebel against them, or like I could be able to say anything and they'd be like, yes, I got you. And just be able to live harmoniously, honestly.
Well, Ms. Fashola, I want to bring you into the conversation. So you are a member of both the NAACP and you're a councilwoman for Men of Distinction. Can you talk about the work that's being done at UMES to teach male students how to advocate for themselves and also to teach female students how to advocate as well?
I am on the Women's Council for Men of Distinction. Being on that council, I sit on making sure that, yes, they're here for the men, but also seeing if they could help the women as well. Being in MOD, they basically start from college freshmen and try to uplift them and change them. So by their senior year, they are changed, reformed, and rejuvenated. Also being an NAACP, we stand for Black people, for Black people. And also with that, we actually had a meeting today about what we want to do for this school year. We just want everything to be great. And being on SGA as well, being the SGA president, I personally see fit that everything that is for my students, no hesitation, I work for them.
We know a lot of you out there are HBCU students and alums. Get your comments and questions in the chat. What do you think about some of the conversation going on here?
We already have some people who are chiming in. So we have a parent who would like to know, what is the pathway to an HBCU? So I'd like to ask you and come back to you, Ms. Fashola, what is the pathway? What pathway did you take to get to your HBCU?
My pathway I took to be at my HBCU my senior year of high school was, I personally was looking for the route that didn't cost my parents the most amount of money, but also a place where I personally feel at home and also had my major. When I first came to UMES for my Enrollment 101 in July of 2019, it automatically felt at home. I'm 3 years in and I'm so happy that I got the opportunity to go to the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. This is home, and a lot of people say that for their own school, but I'd have it no other way.
Alana, let me come to you with this next question from some of our viewers. How do we continue to grow this movement of including communities that surround our HBCU in the work we do on our campus? I know this is important in Howard because you guys are often talking about gentrification, educational opportunities for young people, public health. So how does the Howard student body think about including the community in its activism work?
Well, one of our biggest goals is starting in the school system. Oftentimes we have a lot of organizations on campus and off campus that volunteer within the school system, educating, young minority, Black and brown children that there is a different path for them besides attending, the predominantly white institutions, PWIs, and that there is like a safe space for them to be included, to learn about their identity and grow a stronger foundation on who they are as an individual and as a Black person. And, for us, we always look for community service opportunities within the community because, as you said, Howard, the community is becoming slowly gentrified, and we are trying to push back on that because at the end of the day, Howard has been here since 1867. We were here first, and we don't want to see the community dwindle to what it's becoming into. And so we definitely try and partner with outside organizations around the campus in order to fight homelessness, clean up our parks, just do what we have to do in order to carry on the legacy of DC being chocolate city, being the Black community.
I love that idea, just keeping the legacy clear and intact. Now, folks, we have received a number of questions and we will continue to take them as they come in, so get yours in now. Thank you so much to Ms. Stewart, Ms. Thomas, and Ms. Fashola. Thank you for the work that you do on your campuses.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Now, HBCUs are known for affirming and accommodating non-traditional students. Our senior correspondent, Charles Robinson, discusses the unique journey of one such student.
Hello, my name is Lisa Boyd. I am an interpreter for the deaf
for over 20 years. I have 2 children, and I'm married for 27 years.
So what school do you go to, and what are you studying now?
The school I attend is Morgan State University, and I went back to school to get my teaching degree. So I am an elementary education major.
Morgan State University is one of the preeminent HBCUs in the United States. Its urban research is second to none.
After my kids were older, you know, I always like to say it's never too late to be who you were meant to be. And I always wanted to go back for teaching. So once I put it in my head to do it, I went to Morgan. That's where I wanted to go. And I started school, and I've been doing that ever since. I've always wanted to go back to school. It makes me whole because now I can see the end. Next year I'll graduate. And 4 years ago, I was sitting around like, what should I do? And the hardest part to me was taking that first step. And I tell a lot of people when they think about going back to school, the hardest part is taking that first step. And once you get into it, then you're off and running. When I walk the campus, I love seeing so many of African-American people. I mean, I've been at colleges before and it's been a mix, but it's like, it gives you pride. Sometimes when I'm walking the campus, I just stop and just look at the campus and all the young people, the African-American people. And we can, it's like when you're in class and you're talking, everybody can relate to everything. And it's just a pride just to walk through the campus and see so many of African-American young people. Yes, I'm older, so I'm happy to see them walking the campus because it's more to us than what they may see on television. When you are around so many of people that want an education, it encourages me and it empowers me to do more and to be more.
It's a message we clearly can't hear enough of, and joining us to share thoughts on how and why the nation should support HBCUs are Dr. Anthony Jenkins, president of Coppin State University in Baltimore, Maryland, Darrell Allison, the chancellor of Fayetteville State University, located in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and David Shepard, chief of staff of the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, located in the nation's capital. Good evening to you all, gentlemen. Chancellor Allison, we begin with you. You are the rookie of the group. And so how are you positioning Fayetteville State to compete and to grow in Carolina, and particularly within the unique context you have as someone who was a former member of a board of governors with a broad view of institutions of all types, now leading one of those institutions?
Well, first of all, Jared, it's a pleasure to be with Mr. HBCU himself. Ms. Carter, I really appreciate the work that you're doing, appreciate this time here. I work for the institution. President Anthony Jenkins, he's got monuments here at his alma mater. So want to get that out the way. And it's a pleasure to be with you as well, David Shepard. And I think the bigger piece, Jared, is this. 1867, Fayetteville State came into existence. We're the second oldest public institution in North Carolina, second only to UNC Chapel Hill. We are the oldest public HBCU in North Carolina. So 1867, it was an HBCU then. It meant a lot then, as we all know on this panel here. We know why we needed a Fayetteville State University for individuals like ourselves, right? We didn't have we had very few options. 2021, Fayetteville State University, still relevant today. Mm-hmm. So we still have who we always have been in HBCU, but let me tell you something else. 30% of our student population is military affiliated student. In the 16 universities in the UNC system, we are ranked fourth, the fourth largest population. We only trail NC State, ECU, and UNC Wilmington with that. That's 30%. The other critical point, and this just happened, Ms. Carter, Fayetteville State University, 52% of our student population is adult learner. 25 years and older. Yep. We just crossed over that threshold here. So what does that say? What does that say about 2021 Fayetteville State University? We are just as relevant then as we are today. And I would even say to a population, to audiences that back in 1867 looked very, very different than 2021. That when you look at the military, when you look at the adult learner, when you look at Fort Bragg and that adult learner, 25 years and older, who's looking to maybe start that second career, get that education, and get paid more, we're a real asset. And I say we're HBCU and a lot more, particularly for more individuals. So that's the beautiful thing about HBCUs. It's not just historical Black College University. We are that, and we have the various specialties that's appealing to the broader audience, and I think that's a powerful point.
And President Jenkins, I'll come to you next. I also got a little shaky when I saw the free education at Starbucks at Arizona State University as a HBCU grad. I know that HBCUs are really popular now. So what are you doing at Coppin State to sustain this incredible amount of interest in sending more African American students to HBCUs?
Well, thank you. Thank you for that outstanding question, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and with our guests, David and Chancellor Allison. It's a pleasure. So I look forward to getting back to FSU soon and meeting you and also seeing our beautiful campus now. It has grown. But let me talk about this wonderful place called Coppin State University. Very similar. We have a growing adult learning population here on campus. And when we talk about how we educate them, it's how we create more options, more flexibility, how we become more agile, how we provide more wraparound support services. Those things are extremely important for all of our students, but especially for those individuals who may be older coming to us for the first time, or those who have had to stop out and are trying to come back and then finish. So we have to be very cognizant about that. And I think that we also in higher education have to redefine what is a non-traditional student, because that is changing. But here at Coppin State, we are committed to access and opportunity. And one of the many beauties of our campus is that we have students who didn't go to the best high schools. They are not as academically prepared as we want them to be. And on the same campus, we have students who are the valedictorians of their high schools. Right. And we take those same students and we transform them into scholars, and we provide a holistic approach that helps them grow, helps build their self-efficacy and their self-confidence. And we motivate, we challenge, and support them. One of the beauties about HBCUs, and I used to work at a very large institution down in Florida, so I know about the actual Starbucks deal, but this is where they keep missing the boat. If the environment is not nurturing, if it is not challenging, and if it is not supportive, then African American students and other students of color enter these large institutions, but they don't come out.
That's right.
See, and that's where people, I think, miss the boat and lose perspective on what these partnerships are. So at Coppin State University, I'm not just committed to having someone partner with us and pay someone's tuition or simply write us a check. I don't need folks just to come and pick the crops. Mm-hmm. I need you to help cultivate the fields. I need you to invest in this institution long-term and create those opportunities for our students to not only go from high school to Coppin, but have a transformational experience while they're here, and then provide upward mobility, a better quality of life on the other side.
I want to pull Mr. Shepard into the conversation and take more of, I guess, a bird's eye view after talking to the Chancellor and the President. The Thurgood Marshall College Fund, I see that as being a connector, bringing HBCU students together with career opportunities and bringing them together with each other. Can you talk, Mr. Shepard, about the work that the TMCF is doing to further these connections?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for having me this evening. It's a pleasure to be here with Chancellor Allison and President Jenkins. Good to see both of you gentlemen again. Yes, one of the things that we specialize in at TMCF is getting that connectivity between corporate America and the schools that we represent, and even the schools that we don't represent, the private HBCUs, because it is of primary importance that our students get the professional development opportunities that they need to marry with the academic disciplines in which they are matriculating at their respective institutions. And so that's number one. And that's something that we have consistently worked on to get them that professional experience. But it's also important that corporate America understands that there are more than just a few common names of HBCUs. There are other institutions that they may not have connectivity to. And I don't want to name any particular institutions, but we try to get them connectivity to the institutions that they are not as familiar with, because those institutions need the benefit of that support as well, the investment, the work with faculty members. And one of the things that we have done as a government relations team is actively cultivate a relationship with the members of the Business Roundtable. And the express purpose for doing that was to try to get greater connectivity between our institutions and those businesses to get them familiar with the consequential work that is happening at all HBCUs. When you're aware of these statistics, but when you're dealing with institutions who are graduating in the mid to upper 20% of all African Americans with STEM degrees, and those are the degrees for the careers of the future, they have to have connectivity with corporate America, because those are the students that are going to be handling the jobs of tomorrow and making America competitive in the global marketplace. And so we act as a connector, as you identified, to the institutions that we represent and give them an opportunity to engage on a presidential and chancellor level, and also at a student level, because that's going to be the workforce of tomorrow that they're going to need to engage in order to be competitive and successful.
Thank you so much. We are completely out of time for this segment, but we appreciate your insight. Dr. Anthony Jenkins, the president of Coppin State University right here in Baltimore, Maryland. Chancellor Darrell Allison, Fayetteville State University in North Carolina. And of course, Mr. David Shepard from the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Now, senior correspondent Charles Robinson recently caught up with Maryland Lieutenant Governor Boyd Rutherford to talk about his unique HBCU experience.
You're an HBCU grad, and how did you get to Howard University?
Well, I mean, actually, it was fairly simple. I mean, I grew up in DC, first of all, so, you know, I wasn't too far from campus. But I did go away to school my first year. I went to Northeastern University in Boston, and, you know, went through the year there and decided to transfer back. I had already applied out of high school to Howard. It's interesting, when I transferred back and went to register, they were like, well, you're already a student here. And I said, no, I did not come. I was, you know, accepted, but I did not come to the school. And so it all worked out anyway. I got to Howard, and, you know, you could compare it to the experience, not outside of campus, but on campus experience, that for an African-American young person, student, you could experience college life just as that white student at a predominantly white school, where you're not thinking about race, you're not thinking of yourself as a stranger in a strange land, you're not a minority at that point. You don't need a Black student union, you know, when you're in an HBCU. And so that you're able to go through the educational process without that baggage. You know, my mother in particular, you know, wanted me to, you know, go to college, something that she didn't do, and the same for my father, but my mother pushed it. My grandmother, who was a Howard alum, and she particularly wanted me to, you know, to take it seriously and to do well. And so, yeah, there was definitely a group that stood behind me, that pushed me along.
HBCUs represent only about 3% of all four-year colleges and universities, but they produce approximately 17% of all bachelor's degrees earned by African Americans. First generation and low income students comprise almost 60% of these student bodies, and approximately 27% of Black students earning degrees in STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, they come from HBCUs.
Now joining us to close out our conversation are Dr. Paulette Dillard, president of Shaw University, located in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Dr. Rosalind Clark Artis, the president of Benedict College, my mom's alma mater, located in Columbia, South Carolina. Welcome to the show, Sister Presidents.
Thank you.
So I just want to begin by just putting out on the table that you are only two of a handful of Black women to lead an HBCU. I want to ask both of you, what kind of support from the community emboldens you the most in rooms when you're lobbying for funds, you're lobbying for favors, when you're lobbying for friends in high places? Dr. Dillard, I'll start with you.
Well, I'm happy to report that I've had amazing support from the broader community, from the Board of Trustees, from alumni as well. And it probably has to do with my being the fourth woman to lead Shaw University. So my predecessors paved the way. And so I take my hat off to Dr. Dorothy Kauser Yancey, Dr. McLaurin, Dr. Tashni DeBroy, and I'm number 4. So it wasn't such a uncharted territory when I became, one of the Black women leading, an HBCU during this time.
And Dr. Artis, I'd like to hear from you as well.
Well, I did not have that same distinction. Unfortunately, I am the first at Benedict College, though there have been 2 women who served as interim or acting, which is not at all inconsistent with women in leadership in HBCUs in particular. But I'll tell you that what gives me the most support and aid when I'm out in the community is people like you, who say, my mom graduated from Benedict College. You are the dividend. You are the evidence of the work that we do. And when we talk about investments in our institutions, they want to see what the return is. Investors want to see what the return is on that investment. And so those ambassadors, those dividends, those alumni who have been out there and really lived it and demonstrated the value of what we do at our nation's historically Black colleges give me the greatest support when I'm out trying to raise money for my institution.
I would ask both of you, but start with you, Dr. Artis, because at Benedict, you've launched new degree programs. You have a new emphasis on professional training, which is really unique in the liberal arts tradition. How do you see non-traditional students seeking new career pathways as a big market for new HBCU students in the year ahead? Because we know so much of the culture that surrounds HBCUs is centered in the undergraduate experience. I'll start with you.
It is, and what a great question. I think we have under-supported the adult learners at HBCUs. We've been traditionally very focused on our 18 to 21-year-olds. The reality is in South Carolina, for example, there are 280,000 adults with some college and no degree, about 60% of which are people of color. We can provide a high-quality education, retraining, upskilling, retooling to those individuals who may have been excluded from the workforce because of not having a degree, or who may be victims of COVID-19 and have simply been downsized. So we have a tremendous opportunity as we turn this corner. I'd like to view COVID-19, despite the negative associated with it, as an opportunity for us to redouble our efforts to serve those populations we have not historically served at a very deep level.
Dr. Dillard, the same thing for you in Raleigh. Shaw is literally in the middle of downtown Raleigh, and you've created programs and opportunities around that same spectrum for non-traditional learners. Can you talk a little bit in depth about those issues?
Jared, I'm happy to say that Shaw has been in that adult learner space since the 1960s. Mm-hmm. Shaw had a program called the Center for Alternative Programs in Education, called the CAPE Centers. And those centers, located in various cities across the state of North Carolina, graduated over 4,000 adult learners across this state who've gone on to serve in government, education, and a number of fields. So that's a space that we have a legacy in, and have just written for a grant with the Lumina Foundation to launch a new focus on the adult learner in Raleigh, North Carolina. And we're excited about that because we have some experience and a great deal of success in that space.
Dr. Artis, I want to come back to you. As the daughter of someone who graduated from Benedict College, my mom often said that she did not feel like a scholar when she stepped onto the campus, but she felt like a scholar when she graduated. Can you talk about the work that you're doing as the president to make sure that students feel welcome from the moment they step on campus, they recognize that that is the university for them?
I think the advantage that many of our historically Black colleges and universities enjoy is that we're quite small. We have an opportunity to get to know our students on a very individual level. It begins for us with the establishing of the familial context. They are my children in many respects. I treat them as though they were my own, somewhat maternalistic in that regard. But the reality is our students desperately need to be seen and heard. They want to be valued, appreciated, and respected for the individual talent, skills, and contributions that they bring. And so I think we do that particularly well. We learn their names relatively quickly. We engage with them on a deeper level. We spend time. We literally spend time with these young people. I have a book club, for example. So young people who choose to read outside of class, not required materials, but who choose to read, discuss, and analyze current events through the lens of books, New York Times bestsellers, is a wonderful way for me to get to know my students and really engage them on a deeper level. And so I think it's those kinds of experiences that create scholarship. It's those kinds of experiences that allow students to explore the lens through which they view the world and critically analyze the environments they find themselves in. And that's what we do best at historically Black colleges, is provide those opportunities for our young people to grow intellectually into thinking, living, breathing adults who will make significant contributions to their community and to the world when they graduate.
I would again posit this to both of you. A lot of people look at the Mackenzie Scott gift, they look at some of the positive things happening for HBCUs, and they think, oh, you know, HBCUs got plenty of money. We all good now. And that could not be further from the truth. And this is particular for the smaller private institutions. Could you lay out for our audience, not that we're worried about closing tomorrow, but what keeps you up at night, considering you don't have state appropriations, you're tuition dependent, you're enrollment dependent? What keeps you up about the challenge of running an institution, and what flexibility that gives you to operate and be successful?
So I think the operational flexibility is a hallmark of private education. Our ability to be agile and nimble and respond to market demands with new programs and opportunities for our students is an advantage. What keeps me up at night, obviously, is a lack of steady stream of resource because we're so tuition dependent. Our students are overwhelmingly low wealth first generation kids of color. So they don't have a lot of price elasticity, if you will, when we think about it from an economic standpoint. And I think what worries me the most right now is that in the wake of unprecedented governmental support, in the wake of COVID-19, in the wake of unprecedented philanthropic support post George Floyd, much of that has been concentrated in the hands of a very few institutions, very well deserved, very deserving institutions for which we are incredibly grateful and proud. But it has created a have and have not within and among the HBCU family, which is very, very concerning. And more important than that is the fact that this perception. So you led the question, y'all got plenty of money now. The truth is, this is but a small drop in a very, very, very big bucket for HBCUs. And the concern is that would-be funders or supporters would look at us and say, well, you got all that money. Why haven't you been able to move the needle further? These conversations are longitudinal, and they don't speak to the generations of financial deprivation that has been pervasive on these campuses. They don't speak to generations of deferred maintenance that has run amok on these campuses. And so this panacea, this moment in time when there seems to be more resource than there has ever been before, does not by any stretch of the imagination mean there's enough, or that while we call them transformational gifts, and they are in the moment, you cannot transform an entire institution with a single gift in a single moment. There has to be sustained investment and support of these institutions over a period of time in order to achieve the results that we want. So the danger in this moment is that people will say, oh, they're all fixed, they have plenty, and that could not be further from the truth.
And Dr. Dillard, if we can quickly have you respond as well before we go to our audience questions to Jared's question that he put on the table.
I echo many of the comments made by Sister President Artis, that being one of those smaller liberal arts institutions in a state that boasts of 10 historically Black colleges and universities, 5 public, 5 private, it makes for a very difficult lift when you are competing for the resources and the recognition, and wherein Shaw plays a very important role with the students that it serves. It has to also deal with that imagined truth that we are all rolling in the money right now. And Shaw was not fortunate enough to receive a Mackenzie Scott gift yet. However, the issues of Shaw University remain the same, deferred maintenance, having, close to almost 80% of the students being Pell eligible, a third of those being first generation, and not being able to have the funding to make the infrastructure improvements that are very necessary to provide for today's student. So what keeps me up at night is working on how to leverage the assets we do have in order to make a difference for the students we serve going forward. And I'm optimistic about what that looks like, but by no means are we close to having the support that we need. However, I'm grateful for the legislative support during COVID. Were it not for that, the impact to our students and our community at large would have been even more devastating. So wherein I'm grateful for the support, it is far from enough to do the work that we do so well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dillard. I like the fact that you said not yet. So audience, I like that. Let's be optimistic here and save HBCUs. So audience, what do you think? Place your comments in the chat. We do have one I want to go to very quickly. And this is, of course, to our sister president. So I'll start with you here at Benedict College. What is the pathway to becoming the president of an HBCU? I know you have a long history. Maybe you can just give us a little piece, like 1 or 2 things that you would recommend to a young person who wants to go down that path.
Be prepared and bloom where you're planted. So you must have the appropriate academic preparation to be able to lead one of these institutions. We've just talked about the financially austere environment within which we work. You better know something about money. Become a student of finance, become a student of budgeting, and certainly, of course, have your academic credentials in order. And when I say bloom where you're planted, I mean, don't be in such a rush to get to the next position that you do not demonstrate the quality of your work in the position you currently hold. I think we see so many people who are very, very anxious to move. We all were, we all are, we understand that. But the best advertisement for the quality of your work and a potential president is the work you're doing today.
And Dr. Dillard, before we finish this segment, just very quickly from you, 1 or 2 things that you would recommend to a young person who wants to go down the path and become an HBCU president.
I agree with Dr. Artis. Preparation is number 1, and you have to put in the work. I think that many people who want to be HBCU presidents see what they believe is the glamour associated with the role. And as Dr. Artis has indicated, you have to know something about money. You have to know something about compromise and the ability to negotiate and work with a broad array of of individuals, and you have to be prepared
Dr.
for
Dillard,
the long haul.
I know, I'm so sorry. Both y'all are my mentors. I hate to cut you off because you're going to get me for it later, but we thank you. Dr. Paula Dillard, president of Shaw University, and Dr. Rosalind Clark-Hart is president of Benedict College. Thank you, sisters. We appreciate you.
Entirely our pleasure.
Thank you.
Next time you put us before the guys.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
We want your feedback. Please visit npt.org/HBCU to complete our survey and for more information on the programming lineup for HBCU Week.
We'd like to thank our partners, HBCU Digest, WHUR-FM 96.3, WEAA 88.9 FM, the HBCU Channel, the Afro-American Newspapers, and the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. As we close, we leave you with one more look at the inspiring film, Shaw Rising. And on behalf of my co-host, Jared Carter, I'm Dr. Kay Wise Whitehead. Thank you for joining us, and remember that HBCUs matter, and so do HBCU graduates.
People support things that they can believe in and things that appear to them to be stable and contributing. The ability to read, to think critically, to be creative, to see possibilities is what this university has been about. The mission has been to provide a quality education for students who might otherwise not have the opportunity. I'm going to hold on tightly to that part of its mission to make sure that we continue to produce leaders and thinkers and creators. Sometimes we have to help you determine what it is that you're capable of. And because we're small, we can do that. We can spend the time. We can invest in getting to know individuals. And when we do that, we're able to help individuals realize their potential. And Shaw's legacy is about giving people the opportunity to go change the lives of communities, of nations. And that's what we do.
This program was made possible in part by What is BOLD? At Bowie State University, we believe it means always striving for more. BOLD is born at BSU with a mission to empower students to break barriers and change the world. BOLD is preparing students for careers in STEM fields like cybersecurity and nursing. BOLD is training the next generation of entrepreneurs to shape the global marketplace. Bowie State University, taking tomorrow boldly.